Chapter 4, create a sense of urgency and desperation. This is Robert Greene. The death ground strategy. You are your own worst enemy. You waste precious time dreaming of the future instead of engaging in the present. Since nothing seems urgent to you, you are only half involved in what you do. The only way to change is through action and outside pressure. Put yourself in situations where you have too much at stake to waste time or resources. If you cannot afford to lose, you won't. Cut your ties to the past. Enter unknown territory where you must depend on your wits and energy to see you through. Place yourself on death ground where your back is against the wall and you have to fight like hell to get out alive. In 1504, an ambitious 19-year-old Spaniard named Hernan Cortes gave up his studies in law, sailed for his country's colonies in the New World, stopping first in Santo Domingo, the island today comprising of Haiti and Dominican Republic, and then in Cuba. Hernan Cortes soon heard about a land to the west called Mexico, an empire teeming with gold and dominated by the Aztecs with their magnificent highland capital of Tenochtitlan. And from then on, Hernan Cortes, had just one thought: someday he would conquer and settle the land of Mexico. Over the next 10 years, Cortes slowly rose through the ranks. 1518, the governor of Cuba, Diego de Velasquez, made Cortes the leader of an expedition to discover what had happened to these earlier explorers, find gold, and lay the groundwork for the country's conquest. Diego de Velasquez wanted to make the future conquest himself, however. So for this expedition, he wanted a man he could control, and he soon developed doubts about Cortes. The man was clever, perhaps too much so. Word reached Cortes that the governor was having second thoughts about sending him to Mexico. The expedition landed on Mexico's east coast, March 1519. Over the next few months, Cortes put his plans to work, founding the town of Veracruz, forging alliances with local tribes who hated the Aztecs, and making initial contact with the Aztec emperor, whose capital lay some 250 miles to the west. But one problem plagued the conquistador. Among the 500 soldiers who had sailed with him from Cuba were a handful who had been placed there by Velasquez to act as spies and to make trouble for him if he exceeded his authority. These Velasquez loyalists accused Hernan Cortes of mismanaging the gold that he was collecting, and when it became clear that he intended to conquer Mexico, they spread rumors that he was insane, an all too convincing accusation to make about a man planning to lead 500 men against 500,000 Aztecs, fierce warriors known to eat their prisoners' flesh and wear their skins as trophies. 500,000 Aztecs. A rational man would take the gold they had, return to Cuba, and come back later with an army. Why stay in this forbidding land with its diseases and its lack of creature comforts when they were so heavily outnumbered? Why not sail for Cuba, back home, where their farms, their wives, and the good life awaited them? Cortes did what he could with these troublemakers, bribing some, keeping a close eye on others. Meanwhile, he worked to build a strong enough rapport with the rest of his men that the grumblers could do no harm. All seemed well until the night of July 30th, when Cortes was awoken by a Spanish sailor who, begging for mercy, confessed he had joined in a plot to steal a ship and return that very evening to Cuba, where the conspirators would tell Velasquez about Cortes's goal of conquering Mexico on his own. Hernan Cortes sensed that this was the decisive moment of the expedition. He could easily squash the conspiracy, but there would be others. His men were a rough lot, and their minds were on gold, Cuba, their families, anything but fighting the Aztecs. He could not conquer an empire with men so divided and untrustworthy, but how to fill them with the energy and focus for the immense task he faced. Thinking this through, he decided to take swift action. He seized the conspirators and had the two ringleaders hanged. Next, he bribed his pilots to bore holes in all the ships and then announced that worms had eaten through the boards of the vessels, making them unseaworthy. Pretending to be upset at the news, Hernan Cortes ordered what was salvageable from the ships to be taken ashore and then the hulls to be sunk. The pilots complied, but not enough holes had been bored and only 5 of the ships went down. The story of the worms was plausible enough, and the soldiers accepted the news of the 5 ships with equanimity. But when a few days later more ships were run aground and only 1 was left afloat, it was clear to them that Cortes had arranged the whole thing. When he called a meeting, their mood was mutinous and murderous. There was no time for subtlety. Cortes addressed his men. He was responsible for the disaster, he admitted. He had ordered it done, but now there is no turning back. They could hang him, but they were surrounded by hostile Indians and had no ships. Divided and leaderless, they would perish. The only alternative was to follow him to Tenochtitlan. Only by conquering the Aztecs, by becoming lords of Mexico, could they get back to Cuba alive. Death ground strategy. To reach Tenochtitlan, they would have to fight with utter intensity. They would have to be unified. Any dissension would lead to defeat and a terrible death. The situation was desperate, but if the men fought desperately in turn, Cortes guaranteed that he would lead them to victory. Since the army was so small in number, the glory and riches would be all the greater. Any cowards not up to the challenge could sail the one remaining ship home. No one accepted the offer, and the last ship was run aground. Over the next months, Cortes kept his army away from Veracruz and the coast. Their attention was focused on Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec Empire. The grumbling, self-interest, the greed all disappeared. Understanding the danger of their situation, the conquistadors fought ruthlessly. Some 2 years after the destruction of the Spanish ships, and with the help of their Indian allies, Cortes's army laid siege to Tenochtitlan and conquered the Aztec Empire. On the night of the conspiracy, Cortes had to think fast. What was the root of the problem he faced? It wasn't Velasquez's spies or the hostile Aztecs or the incredible odds against him. The root of the problem was his own men and the ships in the harbor. His soldiers were divided in heart and mind. They were thinking about the wrong things, their wives, their dreams of gold, their plans for the future. And in the backs of their minds, there was always an escape route. If this conquest business went badly, they could go home. Those ships in the harbor were more than just transportation. They represented Cuba, the freedom to leave, the ability to send for reinforcements, so many possibilities. For the soldiers, the ships were a crutch, something to fall back on if things got ugly. Once Cortes had identified the problem, the solution was simple: destroy the ships. By putting his men in a desperate place, he would make them fight with utmost intensity. A sense of urgency comes from a powerful connection to the present. Instead of dreaming of rescue or hoping for a better future, you have to face the issue at hand. Fail and you perish. People who involve themselves completely in the immediate problem are intimidating because they are focused so intensely. They seem more powerful than they are. Their sense of urgency multiplies their strength and gives them momentum. Instead of 500 men, Cortes suddenly had the weight of a much larger army at his back. Like Cortes, you must locate the root of the problem. It is not the people around you, it's yourself and the spirit with which you face the world. In the back of your mind, you keep an escape route, a crutch, something to turn to if things go bad. Maybe it is some wealthy relative you can count on to buy your way out. Maybe it is some grand opportunity on the horizon, the endless vistas of time that seem to be before you. Maybe it's a familiar job or a comfortable relationship that's always there. If you fail, just as Cortes's men saw their ships as insurance, you may see this fall back as a blessing, but in fact it is a curse that divides you because you think you have options. You never involve yourself deeply enough in one thing to do it thoroughly, and you never quite get what you want. Sometimes you need to run your ships aground, burn them, leave yourself just one option: succeed or go down. Make the burning of your ships as real as possible. Get rid of your safety net. Sometimes you have to become a little desperate to get anywhere. The ancient commanders of armies who well knew the powerful influence of necessity and how it inspired the soldiers with the most desperate courage neglected nothing to subject their men to such a pressure. Machiavelli.